Good morning, and welcome to our Service Innovation panel. And I could say is, wow, I mean, the beginning of this day has been unbelievable. I think the content, the energy, we're going to keep it going. And we've got really three great speakers who know a lot about service innovation, and I'd like to introduce them because you know the companies, but we've got Shawn Hakl, who's the Senior VP of Business Products for Verizon, and also an MEF Director. Shawn has global responsibility for wireline and wireless products for all business segments. He said everything, right? Including 5G and the Internet of Things. Josh Goodell, who's the VP of Intelligent Edge, you heard from earlier today. And Josh is leading the initiative to redefine the AT&T Business Solutions core. He is responsible for deploying software-defined capabilities to enable fully automated service delivery while driving cost out of the business. And Gunnar Peters is the Senior Director of Emerging Network Products for Spectrum Enterprise. Gunnar is responsible for evaluating and developing innovative solutions and defining the strategic long-term roadmap for enterprise networking services. So I'd like to start with a question about service innovation and technology. And specifically, are new technologies really the most critical components for successful innovation? And Shawn, you want to start with that and give us your insight on what you think?
So I would say on the 4 C's chart, I might add a fifth, which is customer, right? Which is always important because nobody's going to make massive investments in, quote, technology. Matter of fact, I think most CFOs get a little twitchy when you start talking about that. But really we ought to look about why these things are happening. So essentially, if you think about what we do, we connect users to applications, right? And on the application side, the fundamental user experience has changed quite a bit. The amount of customization, the amount of difficulty maintaining data center, that's got progressively easier. We have to ask ourselves as an industry, did the customer experience we deliver to those folks match the experience that's coming from the app side? And I think if we looked at it objectively, would suggest possibly not. So in terms of how we, as opposed to looking at any individual technology piece, you need to look at the interaction of those technology components and the way it creates a positive customer experience in terms of the ease of setting up and the ease of ensuring they're getting what they're expecting when they pay for it. So I think some of the stuff that's being done in the MEF, especially around looking at the integrated value chain and the way the services come together, as long as they're done in such a way that contribute to that customer experience, and I think they're an important underlying component, that's where the innovation is going to come in, and we're really going to drive a lot of value forward in the industry.
Can I bridge on that concept?
Absolutely, yes.
Shawn hit on a topic. Your 4C chart kind of had technologies underlying each of those four, and Shawn brought in the concept of the customer, which I think there's another entire category of innovation, and you can call it DevOps, you can call it whatever you want, but it's how you're delivering. And the element of the customer, one of the things that we've been exploring and done a lot of work over the last 12 months around design thinking, is part of that DevOps structure. So, how are you putting the customer kind of at the center of whatever it is you're developing so that at the end of the day, it's relevant to them and something that they value? But it's more than that as well. We started early with Network on Demand. It was somewhat insulated. But as it has grown over time, complexity has grown, and so we've had to move from agile development to scaled agile development. It's not uncommon for us to touch, between 60 and 80 applications to actually get something into the market. And so, in addition to the technology, I think there's a underlying, how we innovate differently, that if you don't marry that with the technology, you're not going to move at the pace that the industry wants to move. I think there's another element that was referenced in one of the panels earlier, which is more cultural. Right? If you don't, this innovative side of our business, and all of us are probably moving about as quickly as we ever have. The reality is when you do that, you fail at times. And if you don't have a culture that is open to that, to not only celebrating the success, but knowing that with rapid innovation, there will be, failure. That's another, element of the overall kind of ingredient mix that needs to be a part of, innovating at scale.
Right. So it's not just execution, it's actually understanding that it's a process that is iterative. It's not going to just happen great
We
inventions
call it
that
blast control.
blast.
Things are going to go wrong. How quickly can you recover? But it's okay, right?
Right.
I would agree.
Okay,
I think,
yeah.
when you talk about innovation, obviously technology is a foundational piece of it, but you have to go back to what you both said. Go ask your customer what are the problems you're trying to solve, right? And in the end, that's what the solutions that we have to put together. That's what matters in the end. So we can leverage technology to solve those problems. It's also good to go out and listen to your customers in regard to where they're taking certain things, because you may learn from an innovative perspective where your customer's taking their business and how you can help them and get there faster and innovate in that direction. Listening to our customer, a few years ago was, they went to a cloud environment, they logged onto a portal and said, I can spin up things in 5 minutes. I should be able to do the same thing with my network, right? Those are things that are sparked the discussion around SD-WAN, NFV type of functionality, which we now incorporate into some of the development efforts that we're looking to implement, right? So I think those are key driving forces there as well.
Right. Thank you. Well, I agree with Shawn. I think customer is a big part of that. So really the next question I'd like to talk about is, what are you delivering? What are you working on that is improving the quality of experience for your customers?
I think it's the level at which we focus, right? So as an industry, and I say this a lot to the point where people may be tired of hearing it, but we were awesome at connecting boxes with blinking green lights to other boxes with blinking green lights, and then teaching people the complex engineering to make them work together. And in fact, they don't want to deal with any of that. And if you look at what's happened on the app side of the business, people have moved away from that. So the features that we need to have in place are a few-fold, right? You change in the customer experience side, just the entire implementation of the service with zero-touch provisioning, I think, continues to be an area of a huge amount of interest. You look at 100% customer self-service. In other words, once they have, you get zero-touch implementation, and the follow-up to that from lifecycle management is, never really having to talk to anyone in a depth to get a change made or a service reconfiguration. You can't achieve that if you don't bring things up a level. In other words, if you're managing the dip switch settings in software, you haven't achieved much, right? You've just digitized the virtual cow path. If you have found a way, and this is again where I think MEF comes in, to share policy across components and across NFVs, such that you're focused on being able to express a business intent and then have that business intent roll into the underlying subtending functions that support that, you'll have achieved a lot, and you'll get a lot closer to the vision of customers sort of operating in at a 100% self-service model with very little innovation, or very little overhead and cost. And so take an example of that, right? People don't want a router and a firewall. They want to connect a group of users to a set of applications, and they want to make sure that only that group of users gets that app, and once they get in there, they don't go wandering all over the place and steal data they're not supposed to use. Equifax or something comes to mind, but still. Right, so what I should be able to do is express that's what I want, and then the routing function, the firewall function, the ACL, and then possibly the protection functions around that spot people trying to break those rules, the SD-WAN tunneling that has to take, that works through that should all line up around that business desire, and to move that out. Once you can start expressing stuff that way, you'll get a lot further down the path of moving the whole experience forward.
There's one other element I think that's important with innovation that is overlooked at times. One of the prior speakers actually touched on this, and that our customers have existing networks that they're not going to rip out.
Right.
And ideally, they're not going to have disparate networks running side by side either. So I think one of the difficult elements of innovating right now is how do you ensure these environments work together, and how do you provide that path to the next evolution of services that isn't disruptive. And it's not simple. I mean, it's really, really hard to design in a brownfield environment, from being able to cascade devices, being able to solve for multiple high availability configurations. I mean, these are things that are very complex, very difficult to do, but at the end of the day, if you're not designing to enable a customer to have an elegant path to whatever the future is, whether it's SD-WAN or a flexible device out on the edge, then that's going to be problematic. So we spend a lot of time and energy and money on driving that type of seamless glide path.
Well, it's a really important point, and Parimi mentioned it today in his presentation about you're not going to rip things out, and MPLS is not going away tomorrow, and in fact, it's the core of a lot of services for a great length of time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think what we're trying to do is in the end we're trying to simplify the service for a customer, right? So there's a lot of complexity that's behind the scenes to be able to make that simple from a customer perspective. There goes a lot of time and effort into the development to make give the customer the key things that they're looking for, which is we touched on it earlier, the zero touch provisioning or the automation of the service itself. With that, of course, comes the control and visibility portions of that that we provide them through a portal-based environment. And those are some key elements that obviously customers are looking for, and to simplify that user experience, there's a lot of complexity behind the scenes, as I mentioned. So I think that's a key thing for us to focus on as a innovative team.
Is SD-WAN, in terms of innovation, is it a revolutionary kind of service, or is this evolutionary? And maybe you can start with that, Gunnar.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think SD-WAN is revolutionary from the way it actually brought technology to organizations and enterprises that they can actually wrap their heads around and actually implement as a type of a solution. So from a technology perspective, it's definitely revolutionary. It gives the customer the things we just talked about, right? The control, the visibility aspects, the zero-touch provisioning components of that. But if you look at the implementation of it at this point in time, it's taken a little bit of time for people to get comfortable around implementing those solutions. Somebody earlier mentioned, once it's up and running, we need to find somebody who can actually run this thing, right? So that's some of the complexities that we're seeing with that environment as well. And that's a key component of that. So I think that's where it's evolutionary as it's being rolled out to the marketplace.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I'd add a couple things. I mean, you could be provocative and probably answer this question on both sides.
Okay.
Right? It's probably why you chose the question the way you did.
Yes.
We've been doing SD-WAN. I mentioned earlier, we've been doing it for years before we were calling it SD-WAN. Mm-hmm. It wasn't dynamic, but you could do policy-based routing that was more static. So this, from our perspective, is probably more of an evolutionary step than it is revolutionary. But it is transforming the industry. I mean, if you just think about the presentations that have been put up on the big screen today, how many didn't have SD-WAN? Mm-hmm. Any of them? I don't think so. And I think it will continue to evolve. It's fascinating to see how customers are using the technology. I think one of the most interesting things about innovating is not just putting a product out there, but seeing, what a customer actually does with it. Right. We have actual SD-WAN customers that really aren't, they're deploying it over a single link, mm-hmm. which you'd ask yourself, why would anyone ever do that? It's all about, being able to do application-based routing over multiple access technologies, LTE, broadband, MPLS, Ethernet, whatever. We have some customers that are just a single link, and they're using it to really visibly see what's traversing the network and control what's traversing the network. So I think it's just an example of, you put the technology out there, it will continue to evolve, and I think we'll probably see that in the context of SD-WAN over the next 12 months, 24 months.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So this is where I'm excited about the MEF work on defining standards around what service definitions are. So I think when you talk about what's evolutionary versus revolutionary SD-WAN, you've got to talk about which components people are picking and choosing to define SD-WAN with. If you're talking about, to be honest, running a virtual router function somewhere in the network is interesting. It's probably an evolution of what you already do. The revolutionary component of SD-WAN was the ability to express the customer's business outcome policy in an application-aware engine and implementing that. And actually, when you take the next level of that and basically, if we look at the value that unlocks for us as a provider, that application-aware policy layer gives you direct insight into what matters to your customer, and the extent to which you can configure your the SDN implementation on the carrier side to react to your customer's expression of policy on the front end. And this is more specific to the enterprise space. You have an entirely new way of configuring and delivering services. When you match that to your ability to start changing the routing of the packets based on that expression of policy and integrate in the other NFVs that you can bring on board, you can start having this network reinforced security policy based on the customer's expression of their capabilities. That's where the revolutionary stuff comes in. So I think we run the risk as an industry if we muddle the definitions here, and I get that a lot. People come to me with, this is our SD defined whatever, and it's really just it's a repackaging of what people, you know, what won't be revolutionary is the remarketing of stuff based on the latest buzzword. You know, that'll happen every time. But I think for us, we need to recognize the value there. And again, it comes back to that stream of user to app and really, really focus on unlocking the intent that comes with that application aware layer piece. And then sewing SD-WAN not as just kind of something we have to tolerate at the customer edge because it might impact MPLS revenues, but the thing that lets us connect in a deep and meaningful way to our customer and understand what they're attempting to do. I think that's where the revolutionary portion of it comes in. So I think the technology of itself provides the opportunity for that. It's just all in the way that you embrace, adopt, and integrate it with what you do.
Yeah. Well, it's such a broad non-definition that it's very difficult to kind of put that in perspective. But we have seen different implementations too. For instance, you've got multiple options for doing it. AT&T is network-based, and many providers that we've talked to would say, we've been doing this for years, at least pieces of it, in terms of WAN optimization or improving some of the performance, but not all together and not in such a way that is, again, easy to roll out and monetize. So, and anybody want to address that?
And by the way, I don't know that there's a right or wrong model. You mentioned, and I talked about the network-based approach earlier because that's new for us. Over-the-top SD-WAN solutions are very compelling as well, and I think they're going to be certain use cases where an over-the-top type solution is the right approach for a customer, and others that a network-based approach is going to be the right answer.
Yeah, and I think, a good point actually. I think from our perspective, we want to leverage SD-WAN to be able to integrate into a solution that we currently have. So we've stitched it into our Ethernet service to augment the portfolio that we have. So that's the approach that we took from an SD-WAN perspective. How can we leverage the technology to augment our portfolio and our services going forward as well? So I think there's opportunities for those types of approaches as well.
Can access infrastructures keep pace? Because this is physical. You can't virtualize the physical pieces. So
consumption will continue on this path.
Right.
I mentioned earlier I'd be fascinated to know what Verizon's stat is on this, but since 2007, 250,000% increase in traffic on our network. And it's only going to continue, right? It's this confluence of all the technologies that we talked about earlier. The cost per megabyte is going to continue to drop. Moore's Law will continue. We will continue to have, more powerful server capacity, which will enable, different virtualization capabilities. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a mix of different access technologies. I don't think it's going to be just one. I mean, we're all in with fiber. We are all in. We've been investing. We'll continue to invest. But, cheap broadband isn't going away. And technologies like SD-WAN make it hugely viable as an access option. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's going to be, I think, part of, filling the need. Right. And then, the other element I think that will continue to evolve probably in the next couple of years is 5G. And, that as an access technology is going to, I think, be very interesting in solving some of the last mile complexities, enabling, true agility from a provisioning perspective, because you don't have to dig a trench or deal with some of those construction issues. So I think it won't be one technology versus another. I think we will find a way as an industry to meet the demands of all of these new applications. Be a mixed bag.
Yeah, I think from an access perspective, I think somebody mentioned it earlier as well. I mean, providing more bandwidth solves for a lot of problems foundationally. It's also a foundational component to delivering all the other services that are sitting on top of it, right? Be it the management function, be it the network functionality that sits on top of that infrastructure. Bandwidth will play a key part in that as well going forward.
By the way, I mentioned broadband being just one of the many access technologies. I think one of the things that we have to be careful about is at the end of the day, customers don't want more complexity in their overall solution. Right. And so if they're out there purchasing an SD-WAN solution and trying to lower their access costs by using broadband, and it's from many different providers, that's actually increasing the complexity of an overall solution. So I think there's a play for broadband aggregation and trying to simplify that part of the solution as well, which I'm sure we're probably all playing in that space, but if not managed right, it actually can increase the complexity of the overall solution.
So I may fail the IQ
5G.
portion of this discussion because I'm trying to multiply in my head the year over year over 5 years to see if I get to the same stat, but it sounds directionally correct, like boom, right?
It's up.
It's up, bunches,
Okay.
and I think probably our experience there. A couple other things that we've noticed, right? To your, I agree a lot with you. A couple things that you said over time. One, none of this has happened overnight, right? And access is probably going to be just by virtue of the size of it and the number of places is probably one of the slowest moving pieces of all this, as you'd expect, given what you have to change out. And so the notion that you have to have multiple, multiple modes of communication at a given site is super important. We're seeing that. So as we have, so these, as the SD-WAN implementations climb, what we're seeing is just the number of customers that we call multi-mode access sites, which is not the world's best name, but essentially the number of different access mechanisms people are using at a given site, 50% year-over-year increase, right? So the number of people, so traditionally you sold sort of that magic box with a blinking green light and a line, and you sort of said, okay, great, I got an access charge, I got a port charge, and we got a little bit for the box at the end. And what we're seeing now is you're measuring in the number of access lines that go into a given site go up considerably. LTE as a backup mechanism is massively popular now. I think SD-WAN and some of the other technologies around that have made that possible. The number of folks that are integrating broadband as a strategy for offloading certain types of traffic. And when you couple that with application-aware policy, you're making intelligent business decisions. Essentially, as a telecom supplier back to an organization, for example, you can go say, all right, we'll give you the right mix of performance, cost, and security based on the app, not based on the site type, which is people are taking advantage of. And statistically, we see huge climbs in people executing on that. And that helps accommodate for whatever's available at the site. And so we're seeing a lot of the same things and a lot of the same trends, I think, that you referenced there. And of course, everybody would like the edge to become ubiquitously available everywhere all the time. It's just that might take a bit.
Right, and that is a key point is it isn't everywhere, and we're always going to need some of those others. This is bandwidth's always going up, and the cost is going to come down, and then one of those is you're going to need partners. You're going to need connections from other service providers, and how do you see the new MEF 3.0 certifications helping that? Or not, or how is that going to work in? Because you're going to continue to see that that's going to be more and more important as the services get more complex and you have on-demand, real-time, connectivity. It puts a tremendous demand on the networks. And Gunnar?
No, sure.
I'll go real quick. I
Okay.
commented on this earlier. One of the things, I've been a part of this forum for 3 years, and I do a lot of this kind of stuff, but I've been really impressed with the MEF's pragmatic approach to solving problems. And this has been one that we talked about last year, and we're seeing like real, not even proof of concepts, but production environments where they're actually federating SDN networks. It's a very pragmatic, action-driven, outcome-driven forum. Which isn't always the case in our world.
Right.
So I think definitely MEF has a part in this, and AT&T has been a part of it, and I've been really happy to see that the MEF has not slowed us down. I mean, if anything, you're pushing us forward, which I think is what we need.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, to your comments, I think the MEF will facilitate that discussion across providers to see how we can share via APIs and so forth, how we can take advantage of that down the road as well. I think it's setting the stage, continue on the 3.0, the third network component, the LSO infrastructure of agile, orchestrated, and assured. I think that's a key aspect of that. And now the fruition of putting some certifications and the community around that, I think is going to be very helpful for the entire industry to be able to communicate better on that topic and see how we share information going forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think you guys hit on the right things for this, right? One, MEF has a proven history of delivery, right? They've done a great job at actually producing stuff versus just talking about stuff. And so it gives folks things can implement on, people can focus on and get implemented. I think the other I think a lot of the work that's being done on focusing with the intercarrier actions, right? Some of the work that AT&T spearheaded with the MEF contributions to establishing the Ethernet connectivity, and then the work that Mehmet's doing to add the elastic service layer over top of that, and the work that goes around that with all the different committees, the LSO work that's being done is all super important. And again, it's back to focus on that customer experience. As an industry, there are other people who are seeking to enter this space, and they're, and when they do, they'll be focused on an easier customer experience and a less flawless execution, or a flawless execution of getting those users onto those apps. And to the extent that we facilitate that we'll participate in that growth. To the extent that we don't, there'll be a temptation for them to try to work around us, and that will be just put further pressure. So I think the MEF work on making this easier and automated, more agile is incredibly important.
Absolutely. So going forward now, the next 5 years, and we stick back to kind of service innovation, new things, what do you think is coming up that's groundbreaking? Are we going to see something that's we'll be talking about at MEF, whatever, 2020 something?
I think the exciting part of the phase in our overall evolution in the industry right now is that it's very hard to call. There are new technologies that are starting to mature. AI, I think, is going to be really interesting. It's going to change a lot of things. I mentioned 5G previously. Combining that with advances in UIs and SDN and NFV, and who knows what the next thing is going to be. And it's extremely interesting and rewarding to be a part of it. I think it's going to be, the one truth is that if you're not adaptable and flexible and nimble, you're probably not going to do really well. But if you are, it's a tremendous place to be in right now.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a very good point. It's very hard to predict exactly where it's going to go. I mean, if you look just at the last 5 years, how far we've come and the discussion points and where the industry has taken us this far, obviously, there's a number of components that are going to be part of this discussion in the next 5 years as well. SD-WAN will be part of that. How does that fit in? How does that play out in industry? That's something we'll have to keep an eye on and be part of as well. Key other things that we'll be looking at is, are we moving to the self-service environment? How is that going to evaluate from a customer perspective, or evolve, I should say? How will customers consume those services? And will we look at the intent-based networking we kind of mentioned a little bit earlier? But how are we looking at those environments, and how are they going to change the dynamics and the discussion points around the industry? I think that'll be interesting to see, and like you said, it's great to be part of that at this point, and we got to make sure we keep pace with the changes that the customers are looking from us for. So I think that's a key aspect.
One of the points that Gunnar made around self-service, I do think there will be an evolution from having to make decisions to the network actually being predictive. And I think as a theme, that'll be something that will continue to evolve. On-demand's great, but predictive is like a step function forward from that. So I think that we'll start to see more predictive services over time. SD-WAN starts to get there for sure.
So again, you're right. Dangerous to predict the future, but again, we can look. The evolution to cloud in the data center space was a series of technologies that came together in a set of waves, and there was 3 or 4 phases of that, how deployed. Many of those same ingredients are present in network. So the question you got to ask yourself are, how are you positioning for the inevitable set of evolutions that come out of that? The work around orchestration and standardization of just the way you exchange sort of those underlying work components, the ability to integrate this stuff says as those technologies, as advancements in machine learning are made, as advancements in AR are made, if you don't have these underlying orchestration components in place, it'll be extremely difficult to take advantage of those capabilities. And so I think, again, a lot of the work being done by the folks in this organization, and a lot of work that's being done here, underpins not just what's got to get done now to take care of this current generation, but also positions you to take advantage of the evolution and other technologies that are out there. And I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of that, because in essence, all those new services are what we're going to monetize together, and that's how we make money. And in the end, that's the exciting part.
That is the exciting part. And orchestration is clearly, there's so many things that need to be orchestrated. It's kind of, and I guess the one big innovation that should come forward is something on security, but that's a whole other panel, I think. Anyway, we're out of time. Thank you very much for your insight, and appreciate the comments. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.